he has emerged as an important voice in architecture in Africa, celebrated both by Arc Daily and the New York Times as one of an influential group of architects whose work will define the architectural character and identities of a rising Africa. Mphethi, welcome.
Good evening, everybody. In the room here, I start with you because we are in close proximity, but also to everybody who is online. It's been an interesting journey to prepare for this lecture. I think when I was asked to do the talk, it wasn't clear what the talk was about. And I'm used to talking about my work. So when they said, no, actually it's in plain sight, it's about you. It became an interesting point of reflection for me. So I'll take you through what has been my journey so far in architecture, where it all started, and hopefully where it's going to. Let me just keep the time, we've got 45 minutes. Firstly, I'd like to thank you two for this opportunity. I'd like to thank the graphic designer because the kind of poster, which they is like a compilation from different projects, actually set me thinking in a lot of what themes that are emerging out of the work today. So what you see on the right here is a picture that's often used as a way of kind of placing the idea of the native in South Africa and the caution about natives over, the settler. And below is a picture of two natives who met in Johannesburg in about 1955 and who are my parents and who basically started everything.
Sorry for interrupting. Can we please just ask that you make it full screen?
Oh, I see. Is it not full screen? It is here.
It is.
Could you sort it out?
Monin, it is full screen on our side. Is it too small to see on your side?
Yes, it displays your current slide and all the other slides below it.
Okay. Go to view. I've lost my Victor. I think you did it before.
Much better, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption. So as I said, my parents, my father came from Lesotho in the mountains of Morojele, having crossed over the Drakensberg during the movements of Mphethi. Way back, they settled in Lesotho and kind of grew up in the environment you see on the top right. My mother, on the other hand, grew up mostly in Soweto, in Orlando West, and kind of grew up in the environment that we're familiar with of Soweto. And they came together, they actually studied at Wits University, both of them. I think they were amongst some of the earlier natives who could study there. My father having come via Forte University. And very soon after they got together, my mother having come from a family of activists. When the ANC was banned and the PAC in 1960, they soon, just before that, had then moved to Lesotho, where I was born in 1963. And very soon after that, my family, my father worked as a international civil servant for one of the UN agencies in Africa. It was called the Economic Commission for Africa, and it was stationed in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, where all the African independent movements were kind of stationed. So this is why I say I was born in Lesotho, bred in Ethiopia, and then a little bit in Italy. At the time when Africa was coming through the winds of change and independence was happening all over the continent. And all this was happening around Ethiopia and Addis Ababa during the time of Haile Selassie. I was battered in Swaziland, where I then went to high school, and in Botswana, kind of skirting around South Africa, before I landed up in Cape Town to study architecture in 1982. During this period, obviously living in the frontline states, it was the time of June 16, 1976, which had an impact on us with our family in Soweto. It was a time of the SANDF raids in all the frontline states, Maseru, Gaborone, etc. So we grew up in this kind of very, very hostile environment, if you like. I was cheesed in London. I spent a year there doing my post-professional masters. And currently I jam in Johannesburg. So that is kind of a timeline of my journey. So what I did then was to try and look at what might have influenced my architecture, my perception, my sense of the world through the places that I've lived in during my formative years. So as I say, very early on in our lives, we lived in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, which was the center of the OAU. And what I remember vividly is about the kind of mountain ranges and the rich culture, deep culture that you were surrounded with all the time. And those kind of memories, even the kind of architecture, the mix of a bit of modernist architecture, traditional architecture, still kind of have a place in my understanding of the world and of architecture. We had a stint in Rome, in Italy, in one of the United Nations agencies. And again, this is the kind of environment that we lived in for a period. After that, we landed up in Swaziland for a period of, I think, about 5 years. And this again is kind of throwing you into an environment where you're living within the rolling hills and within another very strong cultural milieu. That again, as you reflect on your journey, some of these influences keep coming back and popping up. And then I also lived in Botswana. So by the time I was 18, I think I'd lived in 5 countries, and I could speak 4 languages. This is Gaborone on the bottom, and these are the plains. It's the first time, most of my life, I'd grown up in kind of mountainous regions, whether it was Lesotho, Ethiopia, or I'd lived the first time in Botswana, which was this big, wide open spaces, which I'd never really experienced before. And then I landed up at UCT. Originally, the idea was that I would study art because I had been doing a lot of art from when I was young. But once I was in Cape Town, the idea of architecture came up, and I decided to switch with my parents' coercion into architecture. Obviously, this was the days of apartheid, and Black students were not allowed to live on campus. So we lived in the township. We lived first in Guguletu, and then I moved to Langa at some point. And there was this real kind of juxtaposition of this ivory tower on the top of the hill and the daily existence that we lived as students. I think particularly for architecture students, I think there were only about 4 Black students. at the time. The studio culture was something we couldn't really be part of. We were living in the township, and the last bus to the township would be about 8 at night if you were lucky. So we had to always be shipped back into the township. So we missed a lot in our education because of not being part of the studio culture. I think in addition to that, a lot of the students, especially the male students, had all been conscripted at the time and had come back from the army. And some of them had actually seen combat on the border wars, as they called it. So there was this immense tension between what they saw as people are not supposed to be there as Black students, and pretty young but white male students who had experienced war. I remember, for example, they were very good at, when we were learning survey, how to survey using theodolites. They already knew how to do it because that's how you set up a mortar. It has a similar way of setting up. So there was this kind of tension, as I say, in our studios. So it was a very difficult environment to work in. It was also a time when there was a lot of, in the 80s, a lot of unrest, a lot of disquiet in South Africa. And one of the big influences, certainly for me and the Black students at the time, was obviously the Black consciousness movement, through the teachings of Steve Biko and others. Some of Steve Biko's colleagues were still there in Cape Town. And we became kind of active around this idea that the most potent weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And since we're at a university, we needed to deal with that issue of the consciousness of the mind. And being an architecture student, for me, it was really interesting to see how architecture plays a role in conditioning that mind. So, the type of symbols and the kind of buildings that existed, which students now with the Roads Must Fall movement and things like that have also taken up as a question around how we see ourselves in our built environment. So in 1985, 84, somewhere there, because Black students were not allowed onto campus, yet the university was trying to fight the academic boycott that used to be there. There were sanctions against South Africa for its policies. We then did a land invasion where we took all the Black students and we kind of went to squat on the campus around the Jamie Square, Jamie Steps area. And being the only architect on the team, my job was to design the invasion. So I like to think that was my first kind of architectural movement, architectural step. And it was a time architecturally where people like Rudolf Eyten-Bogaert were kind of in the ascendancy, and the kind of modernism that was coming out of people like him and Ivor Prinsloo, etc. And I remember that we used to always argue particularly with Rudolf, who used to say that architecture is never political, it's never ideological, it's only phenomenological. And that it deals with universal principles and not with ideology. And it was something up to today I'm still kind of battling with: when is architecture ideological and when is it not? And how ideas are formed and cast in stone around particular ideologies. So that kind of set me off on a journey to look for what I call, and I'm quoting Ben Okri now, the Nigerian author, the secret of our invisibility. As Black people, having studied architecture in Cape Town, we studied about the Roman Empire, we studied about the Byzantine Empire, we studied all these movements that were all coming out of the West, and we were invisible. And it started this journey of trying to understand where our invisibility comes from and whether we are indeed invisible. So this is a church that is in a forest area in Johannesburg. that starts to talk about a different way of looking at architecture. And it starts to talk about architecture in a non-material culture. The idea of animism, which means that architecture is beyond what we as human beings build, but it encapsulates the full environment. So I kind of got disillusioned with architecture and its ability to deal with some of the concerns that I had at the time. I found the art world much richer and much more able to answer some of the questions, whether it was through the African Writers Series, the Black Writers Forum, magazines like Staff Rider, the kind of all the protest art that was happening at the time. For me, this was a much more richer form of art. And then there was the Culture and Resistance conference in Botswana, which was a kind of a game changer for me, because it was a congress that was in Botswana because everyone from exile and from South Africa were coming together, all the artists, to look at how you use culture for resistance. And it kind of began to tell me that there are ways in which maybe you can use space and you can orchestrate space in a way that contributes to people's resistance. So being disillusioned with architecture, I went into music. I became part of a band that was exploring the indigenous music, Mbacanga in particular, Afro jazz, etc. And I was also painting, again, trying to explore this idea of our invisibility. So that was kind of a checkout from architecture for about 3 years. And I was doing kind of small projects at the time. But then I realized that to do bigger work, one had to complete your studies. So I went back to UCT and I completed my studies. I then worked in Cape Town for a while before I went overseas to UK. I got a scholarship to study at the Bartlett in London, where I studied architecture in the context of development. And this was an eye-opener for me because for the first time, doing architecture for the lower spectrum of society in terms of income was seen as a very legitimate thing. And we went to places like India on our study tours. We looked at alternative technologies. And we had people from all over the world, from Palestine, from India, Nigeria, etc. So it opened up the world of architecture to me beyond what we had been taught in South Africa. So when I came back, I was really interested in pursuing this kind of architecture. But in order to do so, I needed to be able to start the practice whilst earning an income. So I joined Wits University as a lecturer. I eventually stayed there for 5 years, teaching first year, third year, and etc., while starting the practice on the side. And this allowed me to have a side hustle and eventually start the practice. The first projects, like most people who start as young architects, there was what was called the community-based public works program, where we were first time we're given jobs, government projects, but working with local communities. So this was a creche in Everton where the architect was actually given the full program. You were given the budgets, you had to run the projects, you had to do the training of the artisans, you had to train the community on how to manage finance. It was quite an involved process that also then taught me a lot about the stuff around architecture. In addition, the kind of usual government social infrastructure, schools, clinics, etc., is kind of what you cut your teeth on. Because I'd worked very little. I kind of started the practice almost from finishing my education. And you can see a drawing board still existed in the office at the time. And then privately, a lot of people were interested, especially in the townships, in trying to understand how in this new space they could develop new forms of cultural expression through architecture. So this was I found this when I was preparing for the slides, a project we did, which never came to fruition in Tembisa, where they wanted to do a kind of a show village of all the different language groups and their types of architecture. And of course, we had to communicate through models and using the book of Franco Fescura to kind of do a compendium of all these different architectural traditional types. So that was kind of where I was at, started the practice doing these kind of projects. And then a student who I went to school with was in exile and eventually landed up in Germany, in East Germany in exile, came back to South Africa, Gandhi Maseko. And he had his colleagues, Luyanda Mphathi, who I'm sure you all know, and who's part of this journey. And Alan Samuels were also in exile. They had been in Germany, both in the East and the West. And they had discovered through their own studies that South Africa owned a site in Germany, in Berlin. So once the Berlin Wall fell and East and West Germany came together around about the 1990s, the embassy, the capital of Germany moved from Bonn to Berlin. And because South Africa still had a site there, which they investigated, they informed the government that they had to build a new embassy and that they were the right people to do it, having studied in Germany. And the government said, no, we need somebody who's registered with Public Works here. And I had been on the register and part of what they call the pilot roster, which was a roster of architects that Public Works had here. So in putting our hands together with my old colleagues, we were able to win the assignment. Obviously, the symbolism of having Black architects was very important for the government at the time. And even though we had, well, for me, I'd hardly been doing work of this size. I'd been doing, the schools and the creches and stuff. We took it on. Fortunately, the colleagues in Germany had been working on bigger projects, so we were able to pool our resources. So that kind of lifted us up in terms of practice quite dramatically. We were able, for example, to explore ideas around how we can bring some of the craft and the arts from, because it's a representative building, we're given free license to say that, we really need to try and express our arts and our crafts. And we were given pretty much free license by the powers that be because of the kind of symbolic importance of the project. So this is just some of a process working method of how one tries to extract from, whether it's the craft, whether it's the materiality, the colors, from our cultures and try and make them in a more contemporary way. We were even allowed to import materials from South Africa and to import even artisans. So the ladies on the top right come from Limpopo, and they came and did the traditional ditema in the cold German climate. You can see on the left, of course, also some of the kind of crafts that we imported into this project. So for us, that was it was a real, again, quite an eye-opener in what you can do with the right kind of will in terms of exploring, taking sandstone from here into Europe, into Germany, taking artisans to go and work there, and the kind of negotiation that happens between the different building traditions and different building codes. Similarly, we then got appointed to do the embassy in Ethiopia. And again, the brief there was to try and bring out the cultures of Ethiopia and South Africa, kind of like a handshake between the two cultures. And now we can kind of started exploring more the ideas of how you bring out that sense of what is Ethiopian and what is South African, and how would you be able to mix that together. So that involved traveling to the ancient historical sites in Ethiopia, trying to understand the culture a bit more, And because I lived there previously, it was a kind of a deja vu situation. And how you can then use working with artists, be inventive about the kind of facades and the crafting of a building. And again, because it's a representative building, we were given, free license, which not free, but with some license to explore these issues in more depth. In around 2000, we then, I got involved as advisor initially with the Freedom Park project, the project which came out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a kind of reparations, symbolic reparations that had to happen on this hill just outside Pretoria here. Again, a very interesting process in that it allowed us to, this time working with traditional healers, archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, faith-based organizations. It was a 10-year process where we were really able to dive deep into some of the themes around our invisibility and how we view architecture and what is important to us. So for example, the tree at the top of the hill is a symbolic tree. It's got, very medicinal qualities, and it's planted for a specific purpose. The kind of view that architecture is not just about buildings, but it's about creating the stage set or the props for other things that would happen. And that the architecture is only complete when the people complete it in a way. And again, some of the themes which now start emerging in my work now, which came out of that process of understanding some of the kind of indigenous knowledge systems and the symbolism of things like the reeds through, reed dances, etc. And how that kind of then developed some of the iconography that you see on the top of the hill. It was really a special privilege to have worked on some of these projects. I think there's not, we've talked about this project a lot, but I think for me what was important is that it cemented a lot of the themes that I still am interested in today. In Faraday, the traditional healers markets, again, we're trying to work with context. I think for me, what's very important is to understand the idea of context, whether it's a cultural or physical context or political context. Probably because I've been in so many different contexts that the idea that every place has its unique energy, its unique history, and that architecture is about working with those histories and those energies, means that every project that we do, we try and uncover the history of the place, the history of the program, and the history of the people, and try and bring it out in some way or another. And then working with the JDA on the other scale was looking at urban regeneration. We did 3 urban regeneration projects, which again were very interesting in the way they were talking about transformation, not kind of at a symbolic level, but more at a real level of engagement with inhabitants of the city. So this was Ellis Park in preparation for the 2010 Soccer World Cup, where we looked at the regeneration of the area around there. And again, the more contemporary work that we're doing now still brings out these themes, which I could talk about a bit more later if we have time, when you talk specifically about the architecture. But the idea that you're trying to recreate a landscape through your buildings, and that the way we used to inhabit caves and rocks can be recreated as a theme, even though it's in a more contemporary kind of way. So yeah, that has been the journey up to then, starting from a kind of a humble position, being lucky in being at the right place at the right time, to kind of build up this portfolio of work. The process, for me, it's an all enveloping process, which is part teaching. Teaching is critical to the practice. Giving lectures such as this is also critical to our way of practicing. Working sometimes on research projects, drawing everything is drawn. We're always drawing. Engaging in competitions, both locally and internationally, even though it's not really it's a bit of an indulgence, but it's important to keep ideas and to keep top of mind in terms of thought processes. And then, of course, the entrepreneurial side of it. And most importantly, the collaborations, not only with artists, philosophers, other architects, etc., other experts, multidisciplinary teams, I think is critical to being able to develop these themes and strengthen them. So working with an artist, you can translate what is a traditional adornment that is put on kids for protection, can then be translated into a portrait. So this is now where you work directly with artists and kind of sideways of the architecture. And then working with design competitions. Again, working through art, through understanding of nature and sustainability, to try and develop, this is a competition for an airport in Botswana. Again, trying to imagine something that is unimaginable, that competitions allow you to do. This is in the DRC, the Baha'i wanted to build one of their national houses using local traditions. So a study of the materials and the materiality, and how you can then kind of, it gives you, the idea to how you can imagine what could be appropriate for those kind of environments. So yeah, I think that's kind of the journey. There's a lot of work that I haven't shown because this is more about the journey, I guess. Important is to recognize the collaborations with other architects that has happened over the times. I think where we have benefited is that through the process of Black economic empowerment, a lot of the big white firms had to kind of team up and do skill share with smaller emerging firms. And we did so with a number of these firms, and that really gave us a headway in terms of skilling up quite quickly, starting from zero up to where we are now. And of course, this is never one person. This is always a team, it's always a studio. And I think part of our mission has always been to enable people who have been marginalized in the profession from being able to find self-expression in the studio. So through the kind of value systems that we have here around creativity, artistic appreciation, challenging ourselves to achieve as much as we can, social interaction, which is a critical part of our culture, and the ability to utilize people for their particular experiences, their particular expertise, and the diversity that brings, and then allowing that kind of personal development to happen. And really our social mission as a purpose-driven organization that is concerned for others. So yeah, that is, as I said, the plain side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mphethi. I'm going to invite a few questions first from our live audience in studio, and then we'll take questions from our Zoom audience and our Facebook audience. So if I may ask Mam Linda Mvusi to maybe start the conversation. for us.
My appreciation to the team. We realized that we had actually more than 20 years ago, we're old. And my particular, I would really love it if
Apologies, can we please ask you to unmute the computer that so that we can hear the questions?
That mic is.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Let's try this one. Can you hear me now?
Only just.
You can hear me.
A little bit.
A little. The mic is coming in the front. Let me try now. Can you hear us now?
We can hear you. It's faint, but we can.
Hey, you can come closer. You can come closer to that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mphethi. I need to congratulate you. Perhaps just to, because there's, in the interest of time, I just want to laud you again, the team you were in Berlin, because I don't think you realize what a flagship it was to have a crew of Black African architects at that time in Europe, East-West, the Berlin Wall, and so many designers and architects were rooting for here in South Africa. And I think it's a pity that not more people know about just what a watershed it was for all of you to come together with diverse but also divergent experiences. And if you can just expand a little bit more about how you did it, how you came from different experiences, and what were the key things that made that project come together so well.
So I think there were four of us, right? Myself, Gandhi Maseko, who's late now, Luanda Mphathi and Alan Samuels. Myself and Gandhi had been at high school together, so we knew each other very well. And we lost contact because obviously he disappeared into East Germany from Tanzania and that exile route. Same with Alan, who I met through him later, and Luanda as well, who I met also through him. So there was two of them coming from East Germany, one coming from West Germany, and then me having studied in Cape Town, but all with a kind of a common purpose, a common vision, and perhaps having grown up at the same time. And I think, as you say, because it was a watershed, we had so much support from the government this side. I think we were clever enough to take on a local firm in Germany, or wise enough to do some of in fact, you have to, if you're working in a country there, to do the technical detailing and stuff. But because Luan had lived in Berlin, he continued to live there, and he became the kind of the anchor for the project. I was kind of working in South Africa here, working with DERCO and Public Works. And then Alan was also in Berlin. So there were two of them there, and there were two of us here. So it kind of came together, I guess, over a period. I think we were lucky in that when the project started, it was put on hold for 2 years. So in those 2 years, we could like gear up and gear into the task at hand. Yeah, I guess that's how it happened.
I'll invite more questions from our studio panel. From Stephen Stein. If you could come forward, Stephen, and
Sorry, hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you? I haven't actually thought the question through very well, so I'm going to try and wing it. I was quite moved by the protest in Cape Town. I think that it's a very powerful gesture to occupy space like that and to really make an object. And so first, I suppose I want to know, did you feel as vulnerable as it seems now? I mean, that's a really big gesture, I think it seems now. Did you feel vulnerable, or did you feel supported at the time? And do you have an opinion at the moment about more direct forms of political engagement for architects? Sorry. Thank you.
At the time, there was always this question about what's the role of the artist or the architect in struggle. You know, do you struggle through your pen, through painting, your agitprop or whatever, or do you also hit the barricades and then do your art in your spare time? And I think at the time I didn't know that this was architecture. I was just told that you are in that department. How many tents do we need? Where are we going to get them? Do the layout for, because we had to like hit the campus in one day, in like one evening. So we kind of, you know, planned it out as this invasion, and that was kind of my role. But I didn't think it as an architectural move at the time. You know, with students, the guys who were studying political science had their roles. The ones who were studying other things, we kind of all had our roles. We felt very, very vulnerable. For UCT, this was because they were trying to say that they are not part of the apartheid system, but they're just forced by the government. And they were trying to get out of the academic boycott that was there at the time. For us now to show to the whole world that actually, no, Black students aren't allowed to stay on campus. You know, we invited the press and everybody to come through, and so there was a lot of anti-sentiment to what we were doing. So we did feel extremely vulnerable. In fact, eventually this kind of squatter camp was broken up by the police, but Black students were then allowed to stay on campus. All of a sudden they opened up and all this space happened. So I think although you feel vulnerable, the achievement helps you keep the faith going. As far as more direct engagement in politics, I think so. I think architects we are very political animals, because we understand how space is used as a political instrument, and how it can be undone as a political instrument, and how societies are organized around space. So I think at whatever level of engagement or advocacy work or activism, or even going into politics, I think there's a special thing that we bring. I mean, if you look at when the Freedom Charter was signed in Kliptown, one of the main protagonists was actually, what's his name again? Apart from Alan Lipman, there was another guy, also an architect, who I'll remember the name just now, but who were playing that kind of role. Thank you. Bernstein. I'll check it. I think it might be Barry Bernstein.
Our next question will be from Helga Fernandez.
Hi.
So I think I'll try not to layer mine, but I think what stuck out to me, especially during the period of your generation, is that a lot of young practices opened, especially young Black practitioners. And I think now, being in the time that we're in, especially the pandemic, I find that a lot of Black graduates, and I include, all Black races, there is two dynamic routes that are happening. The one is trying to be the specialist in architecture and, hustling and doing someone's addition here and doing this here and while working in practice. And then there's the second layer of thinking of the future of architecture. Are you going to go into computational design? Are you going to do, really setting yourself up into the international space? And I find that as a young graduate or young professional, we don't necessarily have the luxury of, working in sort of political spaces or being in, or have the luxury of time of being in academic spaces. So I think my question is rather simple, is where do you see the future Black African architect, young architect, and how do we sort of position ourselves to equip ourselves with knowledge that is useful for our context, but as well realizing that we need to make a living and survive? Thank you.
Thank you. I think you're right that the luxury of the architect as a professional who waits for a call to get a job is fast coming to an end. I think entrepreneurship and focus on that in studies is becoming more and more important. That as you're doing your studies, it shouldn't only be about studying architecture, but also about what can you do with the skills you have. We have a particular skill set as architects, which is quite transferable into other creative industries. And I think the kind of agility that I'm seeing it in a lot of younger Black architects who would be doing architecture. One has just opened a shop fitting outfit. So he provides a design and supply, which before, that's not what an architect does. And I think there are different modes of practice now which are coming out. The extension of the idea of an architect is being extended. Whether you go the computational way, whether you go the environmental way, whether you go the making way. We have one architect from our studio who's just done a course on digital printing and how you can make a house out of 3D printing, and looking at what are the opportunities, both the commercial opportunities out of having that skill, and how that can influence your practice. So I think, the more kind of entrepreneurial emphasis, and which I think the schools should also take on, different modes of practice, rather than saying that, this is the one mode, you're going to draw plans, go to site, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, that we need to be more agile.
Our next question will come from Dr. Finzi Saidi.
Hi, Mphethi. Lovely presentation. I think I've seen many of your presentations, but every time I learn something new. So thank you for that. I met Mphethi when we were both, we had very little gray hair. So that's how long. And sure. And I think he had dreadlocks, I had an afro. My question is more on the academic side, Mphethi. I know you've been teaching for many years at WITS, and you've been examining in many, if not all, and others across the borders, schools of architecture. And it comes from your statement about architecture being political. And I wonder what your take would be if we were to ask the question, have we politicized architectural education as much as we should in order to ensure that we attain the transformation that we want? I know you speak a lot about the practice side, but I'm interested in the academic side. Have we done enough? What else can we do to really ensure that we equip the young graduates fully for a spectrum of the widest spectrum of practice? I'll stop there. Thanks.
I think diversity is important, and I think the different schools of architecture should seek to be different. I know that UCT has a particular bias, WITS has a particular bias, the GSA has a particular bias. And rather than say, no, every school should do the same thing, I think the diversity that comes from schools having particular strengths is actually what is needed. So really is for me to find what is your unique selling offering as a particular school, because of the staff that you have, because of where you're located, and really bring that out rather than try and be everything to everybody. And in that way, you create that diversity of voices. I think sometimes we tend to say all schools must do A, B, C, D, and etc. But yeah, so for me, I think that the important thing is diversity. Some schools are more political, and quite overtly so. Some schools are more political because of the context they're in, particularly around Joburg. Some schools are more driven by environments because they're in less urban setups. So there's a kind of a link between what the school's concerns are and their location. So I think that the politics should come out of kind of your locality where you reside and what the challenges are for people in those areas. I hope I answered you.
Yeah.
All right, we'll then move on to a question from Zoom, which is, looking back on your career, is there anything you wish you would have done differently?
I think I wish there had been things that had been done to me differently. I see a lot of colleagues who started out at the same time, white colleagues. I see a lot of white students who are doing bigger things than what I'm doing, given more responsibility. So I don't think I would have done anything differently. I don't think so. But I think, as I say, I wish the environment had been different. Even up to today, there's still a kind of a trust deficit with Black professionals. Even up to today, it's kind of not quite there. Particularly in architecture, and I always ask myself, why architecture more than other professions? So in law, we don't have these problems. In medicine, we've got brain surgeons who are Black, and that happens. But in architecture particularly, there seems to be a reluctance to transform. And maybe you guys would know better, but I'm curious as to why this particular profession has that reluctance. Maybe it's too close to power, and the people who wield power and money. maybe it's too close to our ideas about who we are as a people, and people need to control that narrative. I don't know. I think it's something that would be interesting to explore, particularly in our profession.
We'll move on to not actually a question, but more of a comment from Tia Kanakakis on Zoom. I do not have a question from Mphethi, but rather to say that I have had the pleasure of working in close association with Mphethi for many years. I have the utmost respect for him as a professional architect, and that he is an ethical and value-driven human being. Continue your journey of greatness and go from strength to strength. I'll say thank you on your behalf.
Yes.
And then a question from Facebook from Tariq Tofa. Mphethi, please tell us about your own journey in this country, your formal education at UCT, your own re-education and learning since your formal education and how it has changed, your teaching and practice and how it has changed, etc. I'm just as interested in your own journey, growth and challenges, and not only your projects.
I thought I did. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of stories one can tell about studying architecture during apartheid. And I think that's, it's like you're telling war stories now. But I remember being locked up not more than once by police because I was walking around with a camera in Cape Town in the Gardens Parliamentary precinct because they used to set us projects in the gardens. They like to set projects there, and you go there with your camera, and all of a sudden a van pulls up, and you get locked up because you're suspected of, being a terrorist. Why are you casing the joint? And there are a lot of stories like that. And the difficulty, as I said earlier on, about really studying with colleagues who are coming from totally different backgrounds. I was kind of hanging around with people in and out of the exile and the underground community, and my classmates are coming from the border war. And it was supposed to, design, you have to make yourself vulnerable to be able to design. And it was very difficult. And I think, but it also strengthens you because you have to become kind of more self-reliant, and you have to look for other sources of support, of ideas. And that's what came from a non-architectural kind of base. So yeah, I mean, I scraped through with what they call Madota score, which is just enough to pass. And I was then fortunate that I worked in Cape Town for one of the professors there, who took me under his wing for a while. And then, yeah, having got the scholarship to the UK, I think opened my eyes because you get there and all of a sudden you are not as bad as what you thought you are compared to your colleagues. So I think that kind of built up the confidence. And yeah, and then the journey into academics again was part of the re-education because I felt I hadn't been properly educated, where we couldn't do half of the studio activities in Cape Town at the time.
The next question is from Lone Paulson. Hi, Mphethi, thank you very much. It was wonderful to see your journey as a timeline and the various contextual influences on your practice projects. I think it's a pity that you have not included some of the student projects you initiated at WITS, which was at a very inspiring socio-political time and had a great impact on the students and influenced their way forward in their careers. The Venice Biennale work as an example. Perhaps you could talk a little more about how teaching is a reciprocal form of practice.
Thank you very much, Lone, for that. And it is a big gap in the presentation. You're absolutely right. When I started teaching with people like Lone, Lindsay, Bremner, and others, around 95, this was just after 94. Very few Black students. I think probably one of the first Black lecturers, and it was an interesting time. And we started because the platform was there for us to actually discuss where we came from and where we want to go in the institution I was in. And so the teaching really allows you to interrogate ideas that you have in practice. So it is an extension of practice in that you can actually use the platform of teaching to explore those ideas. You get cheap labor to do that, which are your students. And it is a lot of practices actually use the teaching not only to identify talent, but also to be able to explore deeper into the particular ideas that they're concerned with. So I would agree that it is an extension of practice, definitely for me.
We'll take 2 more questions. A question from Claire Mukaska. What would your vision be for the future of architecture in South Africa? How do you see the youth studying architecture now, possibly changing this art form going forward?
I think for me, the vision is always about social cohesion and how we can create more inclusive cities, more inclusive environments. In fact, we need to, and a belief that beautiful environments can change people's behaviors. I've seen it in some of the urban projects that we've done, that beautiful environments, which are maintained to be beautiful, can actually change people's behaviors. They can decrease crime and the kind of tensions that you find in your cities. So it's quite interesting to watch what an architect can do, what an urbanist can do in dealing with some of the social issues. And I think the world is kind of interested in how we can deal with those issues, because there's talent everywhere in the world, but it's when you're dealing with those very deep social issues that you can really get an architecture that is of real substance. So I would wish that we do not shy away from the challenges that we face, but we actually use them as a kind of a creative basis of what we're doing. So we look for the positives in the challenges. I sound like a politician.
A question from Facebook, which will be our final question before I hand over to Dr. Ngambule. Like Stephen Stein, I was quite surprised by the student occupation of the Jamie Square. My question, however, is as follows. Would the current and future students on the continent benefit from an effort to create more student exploration trips to other countries outside our borders to help broaden their experiences of culture and what it is and what it looks like to others on the continent beyond what is often glorified and generalized through platforms like social media?
Yeah, I would agree 100%. The food of an architect is travel. Travel. I think when you haven't traveled, your sense of what's possible becomes limited. I think that every architect, if there's one thing I would do, is to take any architect and immerse them in another culture. They say it takes 3 months for you to be fully immersed in a culture, to live in one space. So it's not enough just to travel as a tourist, but to actually stay minimum of 3 months so that you actually immerse yourself in another culture. For me, that's really what opens your eyes to possibilities. I agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mphethi. I think this is why we created this platform. I was surprised that you studied in Swaziland, and I had a burning question as to where you studied in Swaziland. Oh yeah, that's where all of the people that I know said they went to, but very interesting. And just to also, something I didn't say earlier on, when we conceived this idea, or Attila and I, who's not in the room now, but he's close by, it was about a certain gap that we felt we had as students, and also we felt that students, particular students of African background, we studied modern history, like European history, we were quite vested in that, and we felt there are certain gaps within our context and in the African context that can be explored. And I do agree, by traveling and convincing and just having conversations and also hearing other people's stories, we begin to fill that gap, and we begin to create a collective story about who we are, where we're coming from, and what we can contribute. So we really appreciate honoring us by coming to give this talk, and I think it's been very informative to me, and I hope to those that have joined online and those that are here. So just another we've come to an end of our session. We promised to end at 7. We're exactly at 7, so you're good at time. I can tell you've been a lecturer. From here, we're gonna end the session online. And I would also just want, Monin, if you have anything to say from your side. We've done this event in partnership with PIA. We are TUT, if I say we. And I don't know if Monin, you want to say something before we wrap up?
I just want to say thank you very much for a very insightful presentation. Thank you to everyone from TUT for all the wonderful work done to get this going and keep it going. And we look forward to seeing you very soon again. And please get more of your friends and people to come and have the conversation with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Monin. We do have 3 more events of in plain sight that are planned for the year, and we'll keep you in the loop. They are more or less spread out throughout the year, including an exhibition of the ABA, which you'll find out more about. So yeah, we will keep you informed about that. But thank you for everyone who's joined on Zoom, those that have joined on Facebook. Until next time, keep well. Okay, I think just from our side here, we have prepared some small refreshments. So I hope that